Hey guys, in this video we will be looking at how we can go about adding functionality to edit our records. Now the context for why you would want to edit your records, or well, update in terms of the acronym CRUD, which would be the U for update, would be that maybe incorrect information was entered initially and you need to make a change. So for instance, with the Mary record, if we view the details, we see that the date of birth is 00000. It's a bunch of zeros, and that might be wrong. All things might be incorrect. Maybe her name was spelled incorrectly or the email address, but the fact is you want to be able to update the record from this screen. So in this tutorial, we will actually be going ahead and adding an edit button and building out that functionality. Now, back in our view records page, we would have already added a column that said actions, and this actions column is really just going to be housing all of the buttons that would affect actions. So the first action that we would have worked on is the view action, which we have outlined here by this anchor tag. But what I'm going to do is expand this column, and I'm just going to indent so we can see where the column starts and stops. So inside of this TD, I'm actually just going to add another button or another anchor tag. So I just duplicated this line with Control D, and then this second anchor tag is going to have edit.php instead. And then what we want to do, we want to retain the fact that we're printing out this ID as part of the LINQ because it will be necessary. And we are going to change the class from BTN primary. Maybe my edit button would be orange, so I'm going to say warning for an orange button, and then the text that is printed should say edit. Now if I go back to my page and refresh, then I should see my new button here which says edit, and the link should look very similar to the view link where we're seeing edit.php and then the query string ID equals 2. Next, we need to build our edit screen. So back in Visual Studio Code, I'm just going to create a new file, and this one is going to be called edit.php. Now, usually the edit screen looks just like the create screen. And we can pause here for a little context. Our registration form has all of the fields that need to be filled out. So I'm just going to go back to our registration form, which remember is our home, and we see first name, last name, and all of the values that need to be filled out, and then we submit. Essentially, these are all of the values that we also need to be able to update just in case. So really and truly, our edit page is going to look just like our registration page, maybe barring the title. So having created the edit page, I'm actually just going to reuse my code real quickly, and I'm going to go to my index page, which is my registration form. I'm going to copy all of this, and I'm going to paste it in the edit.php page. We need a few changes, of course, so I'm going to change this one to edit record. So that's the name of this page, that's the title. And I'm also going to change that h1 tag to edit record. So if I navigate to edit.php and I can just go to the URL and type in edit.php, then I will see that it looks identical, but the text says edit record, the title is different, and we can change that text in the submit button to say something like submit changes or save changes, and maybe use a different button color, and I'll use success to get a green button. All right, so that's what our edited page looks like, or our edit page looks like. So I'll go back to my list, and the expectation once again is that once I click this edit button, it will navigate over, and we see that it's already passing in the query string. Now what we need to do is actually execute a query that gets the record with the ID being passed in and actually prints these values here for us to see. Now back in our code, we need to get busy with some PHP. Firstly, we are getting results, and this results variable is storing the output of this function. And I'm just going to remove this comment from this page. All right, so we're getting the output of our CRUD get specialties. And remember that we need this function and the results to populate our drop-down list for all the specialties that are in the specialty table. However, what we also need is to add some function call that is going to call the function that is going to return the one row that we're looking for. So if the ID value of 2 is passed in to this page, then we need to bring back the record with ID value 2 and actually print the values to first name, last name, etc. text boxes so that they actually appear inside of our form for editing. So we already have a function that we would have defined inside of our CRUD file, and we call it get attendee details. So we call it get attendee details, and what we're really doing is just getting the ID and getting back whatever details there were about that attendee. This function can actually serve the same purpose. So the same function that got us the details can actually serve the same purpose for our editing, because what we really need are the data points from this query. So back in our edit page, I'm just going to create another variable, and I'm going to call this one attendee. So that's attendee, meaning this is the data for the attendee. And we're going to call our object CRUD, and we're calling the function get attendee details. And then, well, I skipped a step. So before we can even do that, because remember, we need to actually pass in this parameter, a parameter there. So what we need to do firstly is check if, and then we're doing the bad first. So we're saying if is not is set get, and we're looking for the parameter ID. So once again, this is saying if the get super global variable does not have a subscript ID, so that's what this is saying. Does that exist? If not, then I want to print some error message saying error. So I'll get back to this and make it fancy later on. All right. Else, what we want to do is go ahead and get the attendee data. All right. So firstly, we always use a variable first. So ID is equal to, and then we're getting that value from the get super global called ID, or with the subscript ID. So we get that value, we store it in this, and then we're passing that as the parameter. So once again, we get the value from the get parameter, we store it in this variable, and then we pass this variable into our function. Now, what we also want to ensure is that we'll only see the form if we actually got an ID in the parameter. So I have the if statement to say echo an error if the parameter doesn't exist. Else, we want to actually start the process and then print the form. So I'm just going to move this closing brace from this PHP block and then create another PHP block at the end of the form to close that if statement. So that means all of what happens in between the else statement and this closing brace, it will only ever happen if the get parameter, the ID parameter, actually exists in our query string. So we close the brace and close our PHP block, and I'm just going to fix my indentation, and so we can proceed. So let's recap once again. We have our ID value coming in from our parameter, and then we're running the query to get all the query details. And then we want to store that result inside of a variable called attendee. So what we want to do to actually get these values printing out inside of the editable regions of our form would be to echo inside of the value attribute. So inside of input for first name, I'm going to put value is equal to, and then inside of this, I'm going to create a PHP block, open and close, and this PHP block will have echo our attendee variable. And remember that this variable is acting more like an array, so we need to specify which part of this array it is that we intend to print. And since we're in the first name text box, then we intend to print the value coming back for first name. And then once we do that, we see if we just refresh our page, we see that Mary will appear because it was Mary with ID 2. If I put 9 and refresh, then that query runs again, and then we see the new value for record 9. So we can just go ahead and do that for each of the text boxes at the very least. So I can just copy the value section, and then I'm going to paste that inside of last name. And then instead of referencing first name, I'm going to reference last name. So relative to whatever the text box was for, you want to reference that corresponding value. All right, so I proceeded to do that for all of the text boxes. And if I refresh, then this is what it should look like. You should see the corresponding value. So if you get any error, just make sure you check your spelling and that you're using the correct column names. And if you see a mismatch, just ensure that you're referencing the correct column inside of the correct editable region. Now, what I didn't do was bind the area of expertise from the drop-down list to the one that's coming back from our query. So do recall that our query, and I'll just jump over to PHP My Admin. If I run that query, I will be seeing specialty ID 3. So let me edit this. We're looking at record 9 here. So I'm just going to say where it's equal to 9. Then we go quickly, and then this one is bringing back, well, it's database admin. I want to find an attendee who wasn't a database admin, and that would be attendee number 6. All right, so let me just reload this page with ID value being 6. So you notice that the database admin did not change. Everything else changed relative to the new record except the drop-down list, when the drop-down list in fact should change, since the specialty ID is really 6 and web administrator should be what is selected in the drop-down list. So we have to make sure that the selected value for the drop-down list looks like it's clearly representing the correct one. So we're going to have to get a bit creative with our select section. And what we're going to do is for each option, we're going to have to do an if statement to check if the specialty ID being printed by this while loop is equal to the specialty ID being returned inside of this attendee array. So to get this process started, I'm just going to break some lines here. So I'm going to echo in the next line and then put the option below that so that we can see exactly what is happening clearly. So inside of this top option tag, where I'm opening the option tag and I'm printing that the value should be specialty ID, I'm going to, after that quotation mark, start another PHP block. And then inside this PHP block, I'm going to have an if statement. So this is just highlighting the dynamic nature of PHP, or how dynamic your web applications can be when you can insert PHP at will for whatever purpose. So in this case, we're going to say if, and our if statement is going to ask the question, is our specialty ID, so I'm just going to copy this, if this value that is being returned from this array subscript on this iteration of the while loop, if it is at any point equal to, and I'm just going to reuse that, but I'm checking for attendee this time. So if at any point the value that is being returned for this particular iteration of the while loop, and it is being stored in our specialty ID, if at any point it is the same value that is being brought back by this attendee record. And if that is the case, then we want to echo, and we'll just echo the text selected. Because in regular HTML, if we wanted an option to be selected, we would have just literally typed the word selected right here inside that option. So that option would be the selected option. So what we're doing is saying that if this condition is met, so I'll just highlight the if statement. If this condition is met, then we want to just echo the word selected, and we're still inside of the option tag. So it would be echoed in a fashion like this. So having written that code, I'm now going to go back to the HTML page. And when we refresh for ID equals 6, we see that now the selected value is web administrator. So if I go back to view attendees and I click edit on Mary, it's database admin. If I go again, and I believe it was the last one or the second to last one, right? And we click edit, then we see web administrator being brought back. So that means our if statement is actually looking to see what specialty ID came back with this person's record, and then it is saying if it is the same value that is being printed, because it's printing 4 values right now. If the ID that is brought back matches whichever ID is being printed, just make that one the selected one so it appears here. Now that's half of the battle done. If you gotten this far, that's excellent. Now the objective of this would be to make sure that when we change the date, like for instance, we have the date here being 0000, and we already established that that's not really what it should look like. So maybe this person should be born in 1973 on October 2nd, all right? And obviously the first name doesn't make much sense, so I'll change this to Archibald, and this last name would be Thomas, and the email address would be athomas@gmail.com. So of course all of this is fictional, but I want to show you what the update is really for. So at the end of making all these changes and putting in a more realistic contact number, I expect that when I click Save Changes, that when the next page is going to show me that all of the changes that I just made were made and registered inside my database. So in evaluating our next steps, we need to remember that what we're doing is using a form, and a form uses a method and also some action. So success.php is the action, meaning once we click submit, it will try to navigate to success.php. Now we already established that success.php is the action page for our registration, meaning after they fill the form the first time, then they should go to this page. So what we want is a different action page for our edits. So I'm just going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it editpost.php. And the purpose of editpost.php is just to receive the data from our post action. So that means on the edit page, I'm going to set the action to be editpost.php. And what happens is that we're going to send over all of the data that was entered on this form in post, and the edit post is going to accept this data and then run the database operation to insert the records or update the records in the database. After it has done that operation, we don't need it to display anything, so we're just going to redirect to our index, well, not index page, or view records page. So I added some comments so that we have a guide as to what is being done at each point. Now, firstly, getting the values from the post operation, I'm actually just going to reuse code that I wrote already. So I'm just going to jump over to the success.php page, and I'm really just going to copy all of this code listed here. So the thing is, we're using the same form, and we didn't change any of the names of the elements on this form. So all of the names, the email, and on the phone, well, phone, right? That's the name, right? All of those things remain the same. So really and truly, the same posting code that we use for success on the registration page, we can use that same post code for the action on the edit post. Of course, I still want you to appreciate the fact that if you make any changes to the forms, maybe you left out one of the fields or you added fields or whatever it is you did, you need to be able to understand and appreciate the differences and the nuances between the two. But for now, we're reusing most of the code, so we don't have to make many adjustments. Another very, 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 very important thing we always should have on our edit page is the ID. So the actual ID value that we're getting here, we need it because we need to actually send it over in the post action, because when we're doing that update query, we need to update where ID is equal to whatever record it is that we were editing. So the easiest way to get that ID, and you don't necessarily want to display this ID value to your users, because on the form, putting a random 6, this is ID value 6. So you don't want to put a random value 6 somewhere here. They really don't need to know the ID of this person. But what you can do is use a hidden field, and that's a very common practice. So we use a form element of type equals hidden, And then we can set the value just the same way we set the value for every other one. So I'm just going to borrow this code from the first name block, set the value, and I'm echoing attendee ID instead. All right. So we have the value of our hidden input. Sorry, I don't know why I typed form. Input. Apologies for that. So we have input type is hidden, and we have the value being attendee ID, and we can just close that so that when we post our data, we actually are maintaining the value going across the pages. So a lot of the times people leave out or neglect the fact that you need the ID in this page, and then when they get to the posting, it's not working and they don't know why. So I'm just going to add. So that's one of those minor adjustments that I'm going to make. Then that's the difference, one of the differences between the create and the edit, because upon creation, there is no ID, or prior to creation, rather, there's no ID, but upon editing, an ID would have existed already. So I'm just going to post this. Oh, when setting up the element, we need a name. So name is equal to, and I'm just going to call it ID. And so when I'm posting, ID is equal to post super variable post subscript ID. So I modified my if statement. All of this needs to happen inside the if statement. If the post exists, then we want to extract the values, call the CRUD, and redirect. Else, we will print that error code. So I'll get back to printing the error code. And on that note, I hope you've realized how I'm neglecting to print error each time, because I neglected to print it here and I'm neglecting to print it here. The fact is, we can probably make an includes page, right? That just has a standard error message that we know we would print across these pages. So we, instead of printing echo h1 every time, we have an includes where we just print echo h1, and then we just include it right here in the else statement. So at the end of this activity, I'll actually do that and update all the pages in our website with that code. Now we need to call our CRUD function, but there is no CRUD function for editing. So like all the times, we have to go over to CRUD, and then I'm going to create a new function. So those are the gets. I'm going to create a function right underneath insert attendee, and I'm going to call this one public function edit attendee. And then we're taking a parameter ID. And then inside this function, what we really want to do is just write an update SQL statement with the placeholders and the value. So I did say only ID, but ID is not the only parameter. We actually need all of those values coming over from the form, which would be fname, lname, and all the other ones. So I'm just going to copy these parameters, since they're the same parameters, the same set of values, and I'm going to include them in the parameter listing with ID. So we have ID and all the other fields that we're expecting inside of our table. And then, because at the end of the day, we really don't know which one is going to be edited. I don't know which field the person is going to change in the edit field. But once they click save changes, I need to be prepared to make sure that any change they made across any one of these will be captured and stored. So I'm just going to write an update statement. So we always start off with an SQL variable, and then we have the update statement. And then I hope you realize by now also that SQL is not really case sensitive. So sometimes I'm writing it uppercase, sometimes in lowercase. And of course, once you're in doubt, you can always go over to your PHP My Admin and look at what it would look like as an update statement. So you open this up, you go to attendee, you can go over to SQL, and then you can click on the update, and then the update statement they kind of give you that template. Well, you can copy this and paste it inside of the SQL variable, of course, replacing each value section with the placeholders. And so I'm actually going to just do that. So I copied that, and inside of the SQL statement, I'm pasting it, all right? And then each place I have that value in square brackets, I have the placeholder. So the thing is, though, this can be misleading because we're not setting a new value for ID. So according to this update statement, it's asking to set attendee ID to be equal to some value. We don't need that because we're not setting the attendee value ID. What we need ID for is the where clause where we say where one, we need to say where colon ID. So I'm using a placeholder there. But the update statement is basically the word update, then the table to be updated, and then we say set. I know these are not single quotes, so I would have used them in a previous video where I copied it from PHP My Admin, and then you would have seen them. Those are not single quotes. Those are what you call apostrophes. All right. So the apostrophes basically are a little secret token inside of MySQL's SQL syntax, but they don't conflict with double quotes or single quotes. All right. So I just want everybody to be clear on that. So we update the table and we set column is equal to value, and value here would be colon F name. And for as many columns as you're setting values, you have them listed. So we're doing it for first name. We're also doing it for last name, and each one is separated by a comma. So date of birth, I'm going to set this placeholder to be DOB, and email address, setting the placeholder to be email, and I'll do the others. So quickly, once again, update table set column equals placeholder, comma, column equals placeholder for as many times as you have columns and values or placeholders to be set. And then we end it all with a where clause, where something. So we want to say where attendee underscore ID is equal to the placeholder ID. So this is now going to find this record with that ID, whatever ID value it is that we're passing in, which is the ID value that would have been hidden in our form and posted over and then passed into our function. And then it's going to find that record and then update all of these columns with the values that would have been coming across in our parameters. So now that we have that SQL statement written, we need to do the binding. So I'm just going to just copy this because it's pretty much the same code. All right. And I'm just going to paste it here. And then just like we did for our our insert attendee, we did a try catch. So I'm actually just going to do a try catch because it's good practice to try an action and then catch the exception in case there was an error. So I'm just going to write out that try catch block. I'm going to try to do all of this. And if it was successful, I return true. Just fix my indentation. And then I'm just going to literally just copy all of this because pretty much we're just repeating a number of things and we want consistency with how we look for errors and deal with them should they arise. So you'll see that your edit and your insert operations tend to look very similar in terms of the fields that are being captured and the actions being done. The only difference is maybe the SQL statement and the fact that you have to account for the ID passing between fields or between screens when editing. So now that I have my CRUD function defined, I can go back to edit post and actually call it. So I left out a step. I did not make reference to my connection file. So in every other page that we made some database call, I had required my dbcon. I did not do that here. No, I didn't need a header file because, well, this page is not really supposed to be displayed. It's like you edit and it's an intermediary, so it just does its operation and then redirects. So you won't really see the edit post page. So that's why I'm not making this much of an effort to actually have the aesthetics there. So I'm going to make reference to my dbcon because obviously I'm going to be doing some database operation. And then remember that once this file is in view of the page, we can just call on our CRUD object. So I'll say result equals, and I'm going to call on my CRUD object. And inside CRUD, I'm going to call my function, which is edit attendees. And I'm just going to copy all of this and paste here. So because I'm using the same variable names as the parameters, you see it's easier. I just copy and paste. So you don't have to, but I'm just showing you that it made this probably 5-minute operation of typing out all of this into 30 seconds. All right. So once we do all of that, we can then say if, and I'm going to check if result. Now remember, result is storing the output of this function, and this function is returning true or false. So I'm saying if result, meaning if this is true. So this could be rewritten as if true, right? But I'm just going to say if result, then we want to redirect to the index page. Our redirect code looks something like this, where we say header, and then header is a function that takes a LINQ. So the LINQ is index.php. So if this was successful, then we want to redirect to the list. Else, we can probably print an error. So echo error. And we will revisit setting up these generic error printouts and standardizing them. All right. So once this is in place, the expectation once again is that once you click submit on this page, or our button says save changes, but it's still a submit button. It's doing the same. It's going to post over all of the data that may or may not have been modified, but had been present as values inside of each of these controls. And then it's going to hit this page as the action where we connect to our database, get all of the values, and then go ahead and call our operation, which is going to run the update statement in our database. And if that was successful, then we just redirect to the home screen. Otherwise, we print some form of error message. So let's try that. So I'm going to go back to the form and I'm going to refresh and I'm going to make these changes. So I'm putting Archibald Thomas and the other details, changing his date of birth to 1965, whatever it is. So I'm just making some changes to make sure that I can see them reflected after I click Save Changes. All right, so because we're using email as the data type here or the input type, it's telling me that my email address is wrong. So I had a comma instead of a full stop. Let's try that again. All right, we're getting a PDO error here and it's saying invalid parameter number. Oh, I know why. I bound everything but the ID. So because I copied the bind params from the top part, I didn't remember that I have this additional parameter that needs to be bound. So I'm just going to duplicate that line and change this to ID and bind it to the ID coming in. And then I'm going to just try that again. So if I F5, it will say that the form resubmission will take place, meaning it's going to have to repost the data. And then we continue. So I'm just going to go back and I'm going to look at my code. The location. So sorry, we should have said location, comma, colon, index.php. My bad. So the header takes the text with the word location, colon, and then the page. All right. So everything was successful, but it didn't redirect. So let's try that again. So I'm going to resubmit this form and it redirected to the index page. So I had forgotten that the index page is actually the registration page. That's not what we want. We want to go to view records.php. And we see here that the record was indeed edited. So we can be confident in the fact that our edit code works, but I'm just going to change that redirect because I want it to go to view records.php. All right. So once I've made that change, if I change Mary Poppins and I'm going to edit Mary Poppins and she is really a software developer, not a DB admin, and I save that change, then when it comes back, it redirects to our view records and I see Mary Poppins with her new specialty. So that is how you go about adding edit functionality to your PHP application.